the militant Kurdish groups. However, regular pro-Kurdish rallies in Sweden, where PKK flags are often flown, has particularly irritated Turkey.
We heard from Mr. Blinken. What did Mr. Çavuşoğlu say?
Mr. Çavuşoğlu said all parties in the NATO alliance must convince Sweden in particular to take more action to address Ankara's concern and win its support for the bids. As far as we understand, the trilateral negotiations between Turkey, Sweden and Finland will start again at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. And the steps taken by Sweden and Finland will be evaluated. NATO officials will also participate in the talks. However, no timetable has been announced for these talks yet.
Emre Temel from the BBC's Turkish service. Yesterday, we were reporting that Mr. Blinken was saying the US believed China was considering supplying arms to Russia. China denies this, but today its top foreign policy official, Wang Yi, is visiting Moscow. I've been speaking to our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton.
Well, China is quite unhappy that the United States, that Antony Blinken has really warned Beijing so publicly that he doesn't want Beijing to give lethal assistance to Russia, basically to supply Russia with weapons. Just this morning, the foreign ministry spokesperson in China, Wang Wenbin, said that the United States is in no position to make demands, basically accusing the United States of fueling the war in Ukraine by providing so many weapons to Ukraine. They're trying to paint China as the one that's trying to persuade peace and promote dialogue, they say. We're even expecting Xi Jinping, China's leader, to be giving a speech on the anniversary of the invasion that's coming up. It's being described as a peace speech. So they're trying to portray themselves as peacemakers. Whether they're actually planning to give weapons to Russia remains to be seen.
China is in a very powerful position with Russia, and from what you're saying, can only become more powerful.
Well, it really is kind of a key player in all of this. You know, Beijing has been clear all along to say that it hasn't provided weapons. It has been, however, buying a lot of oil and gas from Russia. We know that, for example, it doubled its imports of liquefied natural gas from Russia last year. But it is a key player here. If it decides to provide lethal support to Russia, weaponry to Russia, that could really be a game changer in this war. So what Beijing decides to do now really is key.
Celia Hatton, this is the BBC World Service, our main news this hour. President Biden is making a surprise visit to Kyiv days ahead of the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The US leader said President Putin had been dead wrong to think Russia could outlast Ukraine and its Western allies. This is what Brazil usually sounds like at this time of the year. But this year's carnival preparations have been hit by heavy floods and landslides. Torrential rain in the state of Sao Paulo has forced some cities to cancel celebrations. Authorities say at least 36 people have been killed. The journalist Gustavo Ribeiro told us more.
This massive rainfall has hit the northern coast of the state. According to fire squads, this has been the biggest rainfall in this short span of time ever recorded that is not a result of a tropical cyclone. And authorities have said that they have received a record number of distress calls from citizens for a weekend ever recorded. The governor of São Paulo declared a state of calamity for the municipalities that have been affected. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has also interrupted his vacation because we have to say that Brazil is in the middle of Carnival when President Lula was in the state of Bahia in the northeast, and he will visit the sites that have been affected. There is a big effort to rescue people, hopefully alive. I just think it's important to point out that Carnival is arguably the biggest event in Brazil, and there has been a 3-year hiatus because of COVID restrictions. I think also many people tune off of the news. So I would say that a lot of people that are partying They're also doing so because they're not necessarily up to date with breaking news, not because of a lack of empathy.
A BBC investigation has uncovered widespread sexual abuse on tea farms, which supply some of the world's biggest international brands. Tom Adula has put together what is a distressing report for BBC Africa Eye.
I've spent 18 months investigating sexual exploitation and abuse in the tea industry. I spoke to dozens of women working on plantations in Kenya, all with a similar story.
It's torture. He wants to sleep with you, then you get a job.
When you say no, he forces himself on you, wanting to touch you.
It reached a point that I thought of suicide.
The women claim they are being abused by their managers. So we sent an undercover reporter to pose as a worker. We are calling her Katie.
It was time for the general public to know what exactly happens in these companies.
First, she went to a plantation which produces PG tips and Lipton teas. It was then owned by the multinational company Unilever. It's not long before she is pressured for sex by the divisional manager Jeremiah Koskei. Their conversation is recorded by hidden cameras.
He was getting angry with my very firm nose.
Katie is also pressured for sex by her immediate supervisor on the Unilever plantation, Samuel Yebei. The conversation is also recorded on hidden cameras.
If you can satisfy me and satisfy you.
He tells her, if you can satisfy me, I can satisfy you. Here's Katie again.
They position themselves in such a way that you understand that it's transactional, really. If you need to make money and you can't quit your job, then you will need to pay in one form or another.
Several women also told us they had been infected with HIV by the men in charge. Katie reported the predatory behavior to Unilever management, but nothing was done. The BBC also uncovered sexual abuse at Scottish-owned James Finlay and Company, which supplies tea to Starbucks and major UK supermarkets Tesco and Sainsbury's. When Katie went undercover to a job interview with one of the longest-serving managers on its plantations, John Chebochok, he grabs Katie. When she protests, he tells her to just consent, adding that if she lies down with him, he will give her a job. James Finlay and Company says it immediately suspended John Chebochok and it has reported him to Kenyan police. Tesco Supermarket says it's taking the claims extremely seriously. Sainsbury's says these horrific allegations have no place in our supply chain. Starbucks did not provide a response. Unilever sold its tea operation in Kenya last year. The company says it's deeply shocked and saddened by the allegations and insists that employees found to have breached its code of conduct were dismissed and any criminality was reported to the police. The new owner, Lipton Teas and Infusions, says it has suspended 2 managers we caught on camera and launched a full and independent investigation.
Tom Adula. Leiji Matsumoto, who's just died, was a master of manga, revered in Japan and very influential. He also worked with musicians, such as the French electro duo Daft Punk. I got more on him from Shaima Khalil, who's in Tokyo.
Leiji Matsumoto was more than just, a manga master. I think he was regarded, of course, as the godfather of the manga genre, but really he became a national treasure, a cultural icon. He won so many prestigious awards here in Japan, but in 2012 he was awarded the Chevalier of the French Order of Arts and Letters. And so it just shows you the reach that he's had, the global reach that he's had. In the 70s, of course, his creations, his manga series took on a life of their own. They became this popular subculture that became very much the mainstream. And of course, you have the classics. You have Space Battleship Yamato, Galaxy Express 999, and these amazing heroines, beautiful with these unbelievable lashes and long hair, but that strength of his heroines, the female characters he has. And of course, my favorite, space pirate Captain Harlock.
Shaima, he also worked with Daft Punk, didn't he? Let's just hear a little bit of the 2000 music video for their hit One More Time.
One more time, we're gonna celebrate. Oh yeah, alright, don't stop the dancing. One more time, we're gonna celebrate.
How did that happen?
I tell you, first of all, this brings back so many memories because I was a radio DJ at the time. And most of the time I used to play hip hop. Actually, my love from Leiji Matsumoto came from the fact that I was this hip hop DJ that was also into old school manga. So in my desperate attempt to be cool, not very successful, I must say. But I remember very well when I was DJing in 2000, One More Time came out and there was nothing else playing on the radio. It was on all the airwaves and it was the music, but it was also the collaboration between Daft Punk and Leiji Matsumoto.
One more time.
Oh, she is cool. DJ and correspondent Shaima Khalil. Let's return to our main story. President Biden's surprise visit to Kyiv just days before Ukraine marks the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. The US president had this message for Mr. Putin.
We know that there'll be very difficult days and weeks and years ahead. But Russia's aim was to wipe Ukraine off the map. Putin's war of conquest is failing. Russia's military has lost half its territory it once occupied. Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now.
Joe Biden in Kyiv speaking in the last hour. Speaking through a translator, President Zelensky thanked America.
The focus, the attention, the attitude of President Biden and the United States to every single Ukrainian, to Ukraine. We remain constantly in communication with the President of the United States over the course of this large-scale war. And this is the first visit over 15 years. And this is really the most important visit or the whole history of Ukraine-US relationship. This is the visit in this most difficult period for Ukraine, when Ukraine is fighting for her own liberty, for the liberties of the world.
And that is the big story. President Biden making a surprise visit to the war zone that is Ukraine. Thanks for listening to The Newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service, meeting the Vietnam War veterans who left America and retired to the country they fought in.
50 years ago, on the 29th of March,
all American forces will be withdrawn from South Vietnam.
Today, a small group of US veterans, now in their 70s, have returned to live there permanently.
I was expecting people to hate me when I came back. People welcomed me like I had just left the day before.
I am Na Pham, and I'll be finding out why they choose to retire in Vietnam.
You're ashamed of what you've seen and what you did. I say this is the only thing that makes sense, me living in Vietnam.
I came back to fight the war. I kind of explain it as when you're a little kid, you've got a monster under the bed. I had to look under the bed, and the monster wasn't there.
No place like Nam. Saturday at 12 GMT.
On The Conversation, how being made redundant spurred two women on to reinvent themselves. When Dawn Kelly found herself suddenly out of work, she decided to start over, this time as her own boss. After Eleanor Tweddle was made redundant for a second time, she turned her experiences into a book to help others going through the same thing. You'll hear how they went from feeling shocked and confused to finding their feet, and why they now view their redundancy in a positive light. That's all after the news.
BBC News with Emily Thomas. President Biden is paying a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv days before the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of the country. Mr. Biden said the United States would stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. President Zelensky called the visit an extremely important sign of support for all Ukrainians. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China understands what's at risk if it provides weapons for Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Mr. Blinken reiterated that he'd shared the consequences directly with China's top foreign policy official Wang Yi. The newspaper of Bangladesh's main opposition party has stopped publication after a government suspension order was upheld. The paper is edited by the acting head of the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party, who's living in exile. The Israeli parliament is due to hold a first reading of a judicial reform bill promoted by the far-right-backed government that's led to massive protests across the country. If passed, the bill would curb the Supreme Court's power. The EU says it will impose sanctions against dozens of Iranians for their role in imposing death penalties on anti-government protesters. It says they would include judges and prison workers. The Rwandan-backed M23 rebels appear to have launched an offensive in North Kivu province in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're attacking villages outside a town which lies on the province's main highway. A vast trove of Cambodia's Angkorian crown jewellery, some dating back to the 7th century, has been flown back to Phnom Penh after it resurfaced in London. The stolen items were returned to Cambodia by the family of a known antiquities smuggler. The Indian Ocean island nation of Mauritius has grounded flights as Cyclone Freddy approaches. It's also expected to hit Madagascar. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to The Conversation.